It's different. It's a different vibe. It's no relation to home or away. It's just a different vibe because it's a different fan base. It's not a home field for anybody. It's more of just an NFL type feel to it because a lot of people don't come until kickoff. But that's just more about managing, talking about the emotions. It's not a complaint, it's just a fact. That was what Kirby talked about with the intensity of this game in Jacksonville and what it's like. And I wanted to say, I'll write about this soon on Dawg Post. This is my 27th Georgia, Florida that I'm going down to, and so I've been down there a lot. And it's hard to explain what that game is like unless you've experienced it. I would say on the field, particularly because it's different than being in the stands almost always when you're on the field. Georgia, Florida is one of the rare things in sport where, just like Texas, Oklahoma, or Army, Navy, where the fans are split right down the middle, and you just go at it. The difference here is, I would say, what Kirby's talking about is absolutely true. The fans don't get to their seats until like kickoff. I mean, like right as the game is kicking is when they get there. And it's strange because I've been to this game before where you're like, and when Florida's not been good and Georgia's been good, where it's like the Florida people are not coming to this game. And then all of a sudden, Georgia Tech does that a little bit too at their games. So why does that matter? So this game has changed over the years, I would say substantially, in that the stadium has been developed more. Georgia and Florida no longer come out of the same locker room area, side of the stadium. I shouldn't say locker room area. They both used to come in on the press box side of the stadium. That's changed now. Georgia has a tunnel that they come out. Florida comes out of, I think, is the home tunnel, I guess. But these games when you're playing in pro stadiums, Georgia plays these obviously every year because they play in Jacksonville. And every year of Kirby, they played at the Georgia Dome or at Mercedes-Benz. So they've consistently played in these neutral site field games. And, the other thing about Georgia, Florida that's just so that you have to kind of navigate, I think, as a player is it really isn't a home or away. I mean, when you're at Texas, when Georgia was at Texas, when they were at Alabama, when they were at Kentucky, they knew their back was up against the wall. They were the road team. It was clear. There wasn't any confusion about it. And when they're in Athens, you've got the crowd with you. In Jacksonville, it's just a whole thing all the time. There's always noise. But when the other team, whoever it is, whether it's Georgia or Florida, makes a big play, the wall of sound is different than it is in away game situations. So I think it takes a lot of getting used to on that front. And you always want to have the better team in this game. The better team has won this game. I mean, I would say the vast majority of time the last 30 years. I've been in this game 27 years. I've seen an upset in 97, 02, 03. Well, I don't even think by much in 02 and 03, but certainly 97 for sure. That was pretty shocking. 2014 was pretty surprising. Those were the two big, like, wow, what just happened moments. Like Georgia was an underdog in 07, and they beat the Gators by 10 or 14 or whatever it was. 12, I think it was. Georgia was, or the Gators were an underdog in 2020, but like by 3 points. So like, I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about what I would call substantial underdogs. You do not see the underdog win this game very often. And, you'd rather have the better team. And I think, unlike other games, you really can feel the emotion in this game. Okay, how does that affect players on the team? You can feel it. You see the other side. Like, the other side of the stadium is going nuts when they score. Whereas, and then you contrast that with, you turn around and you look at your side, and no one's doing anything, or they're mad, or they're frustrated, or whatever. And so this game is very unique. I've done Clemson, South Carolina. I've done, obviously Georgia, Auburn, Georgia Tech, which are their own, different thing. I've been on the field for other bowl games where Georgia is not playing. This is I would say, the most unique game. Probably only rivaling it would be Texas, Oklahoma, but this is it's a whole mess, man. I mean, I don't know what Texas OU is like. My suspicion is it's not as nuts as Georgia, Florida because of the layout and the sort of tradition of partying before this game. I mean, now that you have both teams with a week off ahead of time, Georgia has fall break traditionally during this time. It's just become a bigger and bigger party over time, and the Lindsey Scott moments, that was a huge thing. But Lindsey Scott, I mean, people forget about Herschel Walker in 1982. Well, not 1982, 1981. Georgia had to drive the field to beat the Gators in 1982 and did. The game in 1984 where they had to come down the field and win the game too. Or they had to win the game 10. It was like 10-9, or it was a tight game in 83 as well, if my memory serves correct. And then the upset in 1985 for Georgia over number 1 Florida. This game has grown in stature in the 44 years since 1980. We've seen these teams now when combined. Well, since 1980, they've combined for 6 national championships. But those national championships have all come from the Georgia and Florida lately have all come from 2006 on. That both programs are better programs. Now the Gators are not lately, but both programs have seen like heydays. As great as it was for Florida in the 90s, it's hard to argue that their greatest run wasn't from 2006 to 2009 when they won 2 national championships, 2 SECs, and just lost to Alabama in 2009. And that ended that run. And then obviously Georgia, I think, from 17 until now has had its greatest run in school history. So we've seen this thing goes back and forward too. That's the other thing about Georgia, Florida is once you have a grip of the series, it's hard for the other team to get a hold of it. And Georgia saw that over a 18-year period from 1990 until about 2009-10. I just say 20-year period. And then, from 2011 until today, Georgia's won all the games but 4, if I'm not mistaken. They won 11, 12, 13. They lost 14, 15, 16, and they lost 20. So from 2011 until today, this 14-year span, Georgia's really – they've beaten Florida pretty good, and many of them have been blowouts. But when you get down there there's only so many weekends a year that define seasons, and this is one of them for Georgia. And it is for the Gators too. I was watching the 97 game on Florida at the time had a contract with Sun Sports. What was Sun Sports has since become Fox Sports, and then that got sold, so there'll be something else in the near future. But it was their local cable company down there, and Spurrier talked about how important Georgia, Florida was for the Gators. And, they couldn't get where they needed to go without beating Georgia, and they never have. I mean, without beating Georgia first, they've never won a national championship. I don't think they've ever won an SEC championship without first beating Georgia. They've not had a lot of years where they've been successful without beating Georgia. Georgia's had a couple here and there, 2002, 2005, where they've had, championship seasons without first beating the Gators. But this game, having covered Georgia for such a long period of time, I'm not sure people realize Georgia fans and Florida fans too have gotten used to this game being a big deal. But when you get on the field, you play other big games. Georgia's already played Clemson, Alabama, and Texas, and none of those games have been in Athens. This game will be, though, big. You heard Arian Smith earlier this week talking about it's a personal rivalry for him. And whenever someone starts to talk about how Georgia has, different rivals and all this stuff, look, they got 3 rivals, okay? They got Tech, They got Auburn, and they got the Gators. Everything else, those are big games. You want to call Tennessee a rivalry in 15 years and they played every single season, I'll listen to you. But, South Carolina and Georgia, if that were a rivalry, they'd be playing it every single year. We don't know if Georgia will play Tennessee in 2026 or not. I hope they do. We'll see. But, everybody can't be Georgia's rivals. Well, the Gators are. So you've got what you want this week. And I wrote something on Dawg Post, and by the time y'all are watching this, it'll be out. And it talks about the 97 season, the 97 game. And, Georgia came into 1997. They had more head coaches than they had wins over Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida in that time. They had been losing in the league like crazy. And then in 97, the game against Florida, it was the second year it had been in Jacksonville. The year before, Georgia had gotten destroyed by a Florida team that went on to win the national championship, 47-7. They didn't count a touchdown that Larry Brown scored. Should have been 47-14. Whatever. That night, what became night in Jacksonville, to me, kicked off the modern Georgia era of football. You can make the argument that was 96 Auburn, and I think you would have a very good case for that. But I think they wound up with a losing season in 96. I'm not sure that game kickstarted Jim's time at Georgia, but I think modern Georgia really started in Jacksonville in 1997. And, Robert Edwards scoring 4 touchdowns. Mike Bobo threw 3 interceptions that night. One of them wasn't on him. Maybe 2 of them weren't. Kirby had 2 interceptions. It was the beginning of Georgia no longer being a scrub, because they had become that from, 93, 94, 95, 96. They had a lot of losses. Only games they won in that time that mattered to them. They upset Auburn in 96, and they beat Tech along the way. They tied Auburn in 94 at Auburn. So they had nothing that mattered for a 4-year stretch, okay? And then they come into 97. They were an 18.5-point underdog. I remember being at the Guthrie's on Baxter, which is where probably I gained quite a few pounds. But I remember being there with my buddies. It was the off season for us, so we went to go see Kentucky play Georgia, and it had rained that day. And we went to Guthrie's after that, and we were sitting there, and they had the post game show on. And I think it was Jeff Dantzler. In fact, I'm almost certain of it. And people were asking him, did he think that the Dogs could beat Florida? Because the Kentucky game was a pretty good big deal. I mean, Kentucky was a pretty good team that year, and Robert had an 80-yard run and all this stuff. And Jeff, being the way that he is, which is, I'm not running him down by any stretch, but he comes from Larry Munson school of let's not get ahead of ourselves and all that. But I think everybody felt that way about Georgia, Florida. I mean, Florida had lost like 3 games in 4 years or something like that. Like Florida was not the same Florida in 97 as they had been before that. And frankly, until 2001, they didn't get back to that. They just lost the wrong game, which was to Tennessee in December because of 9/11. So Georgia really didn't become themselves, I don't think, until that night in Jacksonville. And I don't remember the 2 Kirby picks. I remember very specifically the one he chose not, In 97, there was a ball on 4th down. I think Noah Brandeis was the quarterback for Florida, but they played 3 quarterbacks that day. Doug Johnson, Noah Brandeis, and Jesse Palmer all played, and they combined for 4 interceptions. Brandeis got them the lead back, but I think he threw a pick and Spurrier yanked him out. It was a whole thing. And that day was, no one from Florida thought they were losing that game. No shot. And Hines got the ball out to midfield, and then a tipped ball on a play from the DB from Florida, trying to get the ball from Mike, trying to get the ball to Corey Allen, I think it was, resulted in a really good play by Florida picking the ball off. Now that stopped that drive, but the next drive, Hines Ward on a trick play, got it to Larry Brown. There was a one-handed left-handed catch from Larry to get the ball even further down the field. And like there was a play to Landis Gary, I think it was, or no, it wasn't Orlando Scary. It was Selma Calloway. I'm doing all of this off the top of my head, by the way. And then Robert took it in from 27 yards out. Georgia had a 7-0 lead. And that was not expected either. They were just outplaying Florida. I mean, I think they had a 14-3 lead at the half. They let that go in early third quarter. But I very specifically remember, Thad Parker, who you may or may not know, he went to Crim with Larry. Someone in his family had died. I don't know if he made the trip or not, but I remember that being a big deal that week or that game. And that moment really revitalized Georgia, Florida. It'd been away from Jacksonville, and this was new Georgia, Florida. This was new. The stadium was brand new, and it wasn't the chain link fence around the field and the old aluminum. It was the teal color seats, and this was modern Jacksonville, which looked straight out of mid 1990s. And Georgia went down there and beat them by 20. Orlando Scary had a great run at the end. Hines Ward played outstanding in that game. And from that point forward, Georgia still was getting their ass whipped solidly. I mean, from 97 to 07, they won once, which was, they won in 97, but they won one game in between there, which was 04, in a game that they, Florida had fired their coach the week before because of losing at Mississippi State. So when Kirby talks about it's a different vibe, it's because this game means more than any other game on Georgia's schedule. I'm just going to say it like it is, okay? It's the most important game that Georgia plays. And go down there and lose this weekend, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You will see what I'm talking about. There is no more important game that Georgia plays than against the Florida Gators. Now, Auburn, Georgia is really, really important. Georgia Tech is different and is important in a different kind of way. But Florida is Georgia's mortal enemy, okay? And they are the ones that have prevented Georgia from winning and moving forward almost more than anyone else. I think modern now you'd say it'd be Alabama, but they're not rivals. They just play in big games. What you'll see over time, you younger folks, is that the appreciation for this game grows over time because there's so much that we can depend on changing in the world. And this game will change too. It will not be in Jacksonville in 2026 and 27, but it will almost certainly return in 2028, okay? And you can always depend on this game, and you can sort of set your calendar by this game. I mean, there have been so many great players, so many great moments, so many huge memories in this game. And when Kirby says it's just a different vibe because it's a different base, a fan base, Claude Felton, Georgia's sports information director for 40 years or whatever it is, we would talk a lot, and we talked about this game and Tech and all that. And, Claude's opinion, and this was probably for everybody that's certainly south of Tifton and maybe just a little bit north of that, this is their home game. This is South Georgia's home game. And you can see that. This is not the crowd you get in Athens. It's not the crowd that you get at bowl games. And it's not the crowd that you get in Atlanta for Tech or for like the Clemson game at the beginning of this season. This is a different crowd. When you're mixing the Kool-Aid, there's not as much water. It's more Kool-Aid. So these folks are, I would argue, more hardcore for Georgia than anybody else in the state. Per capita. And this could be some crazy person in Scottsdale that, is the biggest Georgia fan ever. But I would say more often than not, the folks are going to be, anywhere from Folkestone to Valdosta to, Nashville or wherever down there that you want to say, St. Mary's. I mean, like that area, Camden County, Brunswick, that gets inundated with Georgia folks is such a rite of passage. As a student, I think at Georgia, certainly I didn't play at Georgia, but I can assure you that is a huge game for people who did. And this moment is always a huge and critical and pivotal moment in the season. We'll see if Georgia's ready for it, but I do think that Kirby's right in that it's a different vibe. Yeah, no kidding about that.